Hello everyone, Dr. Polaris here. During the Cenozoic, terrestrial mammals returned to the oceans multiple times, with cetaceans, pinnipeds and sirenians being the most famous examples. However, other less well-known groups took part in this transition as well, including the subject of today's episode, the bizarre Desmostylians. These bulky herbivorous animals were native to the coastal regions that bordered the Pacific Ocean, with their remains having been recovered from what is now Japan, eastern Russia, and the entire western seaboard of North America, down to the tip of Baja California in Mexico. First appearing during the early Oligocene circa 30 million years ago, Desmostylians somewhat resembled modern hippos, although were not closely related to them. In fact, given their odd mixture of anatomical features, these animals have proven very difficult to classify. Paleontologists have settled on two possible identities for these aquatic heffalumps, with these being as potential members of the herbivorous Afrotherian lineage Painungulata, making them close relatives of elephants and the vaguely similar sirenians, or as basal perissodactyls, although some recent studies have favoured a placement close to the odd-toed ungulates, in particular to an Eocene family of somewhat tapir-like mammals known as the Anthracobunids. Other scientists have argued that Desmostylians were just as likely to have been Afrotherians based on their suite of anatomical traits. Given that the remains of these animals have only been found in Pacific coastal regions, which is pretty far away from what was then the island continent of Afro-Arabia, I tend towards supporting the proposed relationships with Anthracobunids, which were native to the Indian subcontinent. The fact that Anthracobunids have been interpreted as living in marshy ecosystems in close proximity to water is yet another strong clue, although if Desmostylians are found to be painungulates, I wouldn't be surprised. All of these animals were relatively large, even the oldest and most basal forms, ranging from pig to hippo-sized, with the largest known specimens projected to have weighed several tons. In my research, I kept stumbling onto claims that the most massive Desmostylians were comparable in size to the enormous Steller's sea cow from the Pleistocene and Holocene. However, given that this gentle giant sirenian could reach 30 feet in length and 10 tons in mass, this must simply be a misconception. All known species shared a suite of striking anatomical traits, including heavy builds, barrel-shaped bodies, robust limbs, and retracted nasal openings similar to those of other aquatic mammals. The eyes were positioned close to the top of the skull, enabling these animals to see above the water when submerged, with their bones being spongy in structure, superficially similar to the condition seen in cetaceans. Possessing forward-pointing tusks formed of the incisors and canines, it's thought that Desmostylians fed mostly on kelp and sometimes seagrass, while earlier forms such as the Oligocene Ashoroa from Hokkaido, Japan, had low-crowned bunodont molars. The most derived forms, like the genus Desmostylus, possessed truly bizarre molars and premolars, which resembled tightly packed bundles of pillars, which gave the clade its name. This was probably an adaptation for their highly specialised diets, as Desmostylians would have consumed a lot of abrasive grit and sand as they chowed down on kelp and seagrass. It was once assumed that these mammals were semi-aquatic, similar to modern sea lions, with their heavily built limbs being capable of hauling their bulky frames out of water and onto land. However, it's since been found that most Desmostylians, with the possible exception of Desmostylus itself, were obligate marine animals similar to manatees and dugongs, with their limbs being incapable of supporting their own weight on land. More recent studies have vindicated this assessment, as Desmostylians had a ribcage morphology more like that of sirenians and modern cetaceans. Most were probably slow-swimming animals that sank down to the seabed in order to feed, bounding about down there in a similar way to modern hippos. Desmostylians can be divided into two main families. These included the paleoparadoxiids, which encompassed the aforementioned small and early genus Ashoroa, as well as later and larger forms such as the Miocene Neoparadoxia from the western coastline of North America. This was one of the most massive Desmostylians, with the largest known specimens measuring up to 2.7 meters long. It possessed an oddly shaped skull, with an elongated and narrow upper jaw that had a huge diastema, or gap, between the scraping peg-like incisors and the broad crushing molars, which was an adaptation for plucking kelp and seagrass. Like all desmostylians, the feet were proportionally large, with somewhat splayed, probably webbed digits that terminated in small blunt hooves. It was a close relative of the more widespread genus Paleoparadoxia, whose name appropriately means ancient paradox, referring to the animal's odd appearance and mysterious relationships to other placental mammals. Ranging from Japan to northern Mexico during the late Miocene, this was another massive form that could have potentially weighed up to 3 tons or so. Although this mass estimate was made back in 1996, when the group was not as well understood as they are today, so I'm not sure how accurate this is. A completely marine animal, they seem to have preferred deep offshore waters, spending much of their time foraging on the seabed. In life, it would have had to watch out for a variety of formidable oceanic predators, such as raptorial sperm whales and the infamous giant shark Otodus megalodon, a successful genus and one of the youngest desmostylians. Paleoparadoxia thrived between 20 and 10 million years ago, before vanishing during the late Miocene. The other major desmostylian family were the desmostylids themselves. These first appeared during the early Oligocene, with basal forms such as Behematops, which produced 2 species and was native to what is now Japan, the US state of Washington, and Vancouver Island, British Columbia. Named after the biblical behemoth, it had cusped molars that more resembled those of mastodons or perissodactyls than those of the later Desmostylus. The species B. proteus from North America was quite large, potentially measuring up to 10 feet long and weighing about 2 metric tons, comparable to a big modern hippo. In addition to Behematops, there were several other basal desmostylids, about which there is little information available online, such as the recently described Unalaska stylus from Miocene age deposits in Alaska. However, by far the most famous member of the family was Desmostylus. This was another highly successful and long-lasting genus, dwelling from Baja California to Japan between 28 and 7.2 million years ago, persisting for an astonishing 21 million years. Like other members of the group, Desmostylus was a squat, bulky animal that would have somewhat resembled a hybrid of a hippo and a manatee. The largest relatively complete specimens measured about 2.75 meters, or about 9 feet long, and weighed in the region of 1.2 metric tons, while the fragmentary humerus belonged to a much larger individual that may have reached 2.8 tons. Its skull was elongated and resembled one of those plastic wedge-shaped doorstops when seen from the side, possessing slender narrow jaws and a vaulted palate, terminating in forward-pointing tusks on the upper and lower jaw tips. A mostly fully aquatic genus, recent isotope studies have suggested that Desmostylus likely lived, or at least spent a large amount of time, in freshwater or estuary ecosystems, foraging there for aquatic freshwater plants. Its bones were less dense than those of other desmostylians, which suggests that this animal had a more active swimming lifestyle, and possibly fed on floating kelp at the surface rather than on the seabed. Despite its incredible success, however, this was to be the very last of the desmostylians, dying out around 7 million years ago. Their decline seems to have been influenced both by competition with the Sirenians, which had spread into the Pacific Ocean during the Miocene, as well as by changing climatic conditions. It may be that the desmostylians became increasingly specialised due to pressure with Sirenians, which made them more vulnerable to extinction, being the only group of Cenozoic marine mammals to completely die out. Thanks for watching, everyone. The next episode will be covering the appropriately wintry Ice Age rhino genus Elasmotherium and its relatives. So until then, I'll see you again soon. Cheerio.